Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 6 of Computer Science 422. I'm happy to be back with you. This lecture, we're going to be talking about inputs into your UI, um, and we will dive into that into the next video. But before we start all that, I want to do some housekeeping and then give you some updates and walk through a little bit on PS2 as that's starting to get a little bit more close to reality for everyone. So first off, we do have deliverables for GR1 due today. And for those group deliverables, you don't need to worry about submitting anything. We'll just check the Google Docs to make sure that everything is in good shape there. And the idea is that as long as you have it up there by the due date, we'll go and check on that. And this way you don't have to lock them down into the submission system. So don't need to submit them. We'll find you to go and check those things out. Okay. But PS1 and GR1 are both due today, the 28th. And I also want to mention for this week, we're going to do a little bit different. Today we have lecture videos like normal. For Wednesday's class, we're actually going to be doing this as an optional lab. So we tend to, well, basically the idea is we want to be able to give folks who need some help with JavaScript that help. But we recognize that not everybody is at that same level and would really benefit from a very intro level JavaScript lab. So this is going to be something that for Wednesday's class this week, instead of lecture videos, we're actually going to have a live session where Jaun is going to be walking you through some basics of JavaScript, give you some practice. I'll be there to give some feedback as needed. And we're going to do that twice. So this week we have one on the 30th. That's our Wednesday class. And you can just use Jaun's office hour link to visit that class time. She'll be there walking through some demonstrations and giving you opportunities to practice. I'll be there to give some feedback on some of the work while you're doing it. If you know JavaScript and feel pretty comfortable with it, you definitely can skip these. That's totally fine. And we will record them and have them available for anybody who wants to make it but can't. We'll make sure that we give that the video of that lab for you. So that'll be this week. We also are going to do that again next week as well. So it'll be a Monday lecture video and then Wednesday lab sessions again for for this week and for next week. So for lab during the next class on Wednesday, again, this is going to be during the normal office hour time, which is our normal class time. So Wednesday at 3, Jaun will have her office hour link ready for that. Again, these are optional classes and are really going to focus on JavaScript, particularly as it pertains to helping you do PS2. So if you're comfortable with the HTML, CSS, JavaScript world, you can skip. Remember, these are the only times really that we're going to do coding basics in class. Recommended that you use Chrome for this, and you should also have a text editor already ready to go. I think Jaun and I both use Sublime. We're most comfortable and familiar with that. So do have those installed before you show up for the lab time. And then you also might want to really review the basics of HTML and CSS before you come in. There's some resources listed in PS2. And then also this week, today actually, for part of our lecture videos, I've included a YouTube playlist of some CSS basics that I think are really, really great. They're done by the W3 Schools folks. They do move a little bit slow, but in a very useful, meticulous sort of way. So I actually picked up a few little reminders and tips on stuff as I was looking through those videos. So encourage everybody to take a look at those videos for CSS, and especially if you're new to this world, take a look at those before coming to lab on Wednesday. And then, yeah, once you take a look at some of that stuff, you should really start getting yourself familiar with PS2. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that now. So you might want to pause the video now, open up some of the skeleton code that's available on Blackboard right now. You can go grab those and take a look. I'm going to show you my semi-finished version so you get a feel for what it's actually supposed to do once it's working. And then I'm going to walk through some of the skeleton code just to kind of help situate you with what that skeleton code is built to do, particularly in the sort of the three separations of our MVC, the model view controller, and how you're actually meant to sort of map the MVC idea into the skeleton code and what to do there. So let's walk through some of the skeleton code, and I'll show you a little bit of my example. Let's see, I need to pull that up for you here. Okay, so here's my example. It's not totally done and formatted properly, but it mostly works, so it'll be good enough for our demonstration purposes. So when you first start the program, it should have this standard board in place. And that's basically so that when we test it out, we know what to expect when we test things. The new game button over here will function and will populate new configurations, but really you want to test it, and we're going to test it based on this initial seeded configuration that's sort of already baked in. And then the move function here is meant to accept inputs that make sense. So you can have some sort of mechanism to tell me that that's not a good mechanism or a good input. And we're going to use the board enumerations here as the input. So if you're not familiar with Candy Crush, you're trying to make 3 in a row. So C3 could move up here to make this 3 in a row. So let's put in C3, and what you're going to see is that it highlights the up arrow, and that only changes the color and activates this button when there's a valid move for C3. So I couldn't move C3 to the right or to the left or down because that won't make a crushable move. I could move it up to do that, and so it unlocks these buttons. So if we look at one that doesn't have any valid moves, let's say A1 doesn't have any valid moves, I don't think. So none of the buttons will light up for that one. You'll also notice the crush button isn't lit up here either. So back to C3, we get one up button option. And so when you select that, it should swap the 2 little candies that were there. And now that there is a crushable move, you'll see the crush once button is unlocked. You can select that. And this one will also now, the new row that comes in creates a little crushable option as well. So without having to make any moves, the crush button is now still open. You can hit that again and get rid of them. Now there's no crushes on the board, so I'd have to think of a new one. Here's a good one, G7. Let's demonstrate one that might even have some options. Well, let's look at F1. That's a down one. So F1, we could move that left because that would make an orange set over here, or we could move it down, which would make the blue set here. So you can see those 2 options for buttons are open. Let's move it left for fun. And then now the crush button's open. And so, okay. So this is the basic function of what this should look like. The formatting isn't exactly right, so don't grade me on it just yet, but I did want to have one ready enough that I could demonstrate a little bit of what this is going to look like for you. Okay, so let me get this out of the way, and let's walk a little bit through some of the skeleton code that we provide for you. And let me make sure I actually go to the right skeleton code. There we go. Okay, so this is the index.html that we provide for you without too much in there. And essentially, I just want to walk you through little bits here to kind of get you sort of situated on what's going on. So in an HTML, in JavaScript document, this document.ready function here is essentially, and we give you a little description above it, this is what's going to happen once all of the page is loaded. The script inside this is going to be the first function that will happen, the first action that's going to happen on there. Here is where you're really just going to be just setting everything up. So you're going to tell the system to make a new board and to start a new game. Now those are all back-end features, and they're already created for you in the other bits of these .js files. Okay, so you don't have to create a new board on the back end. You need to represent the new board, but that's not going to happen in this little first go. In here, the only things you should be doing is telling the system, the back end, to start a new game and to create a new board. That's all you really need to worry about there. And then when you get down to here for the event handlers, what we're doing in these ones is just responding to the model state, okay? So let me go back to some of my slides because I want to take a look at the way we had set up this whole system here, right? So your job, the HTML side here, really is just to update the view, the UI side for the user. And this needs to respond to the model. So whatever the model says the state is, the view needs to represent that. And then for input events, the inputs events need to trigger controller activities. which are going to be the sort of get and set kind of things. And those controller activities will update the model. So when I am changing those pieces, we're changing the front end side as the visualization for your user. And we also do have to have the controller update the back end as well, update the model. Okay. So that's the relationship that we have here for all these things. So let me go back to the skeleton code here and show you when we have this here, right, these event handlers, you'll notice, and this is in the jQuery format, but this is a JavaScript function essentially, where we are selecting the board that you create, right? So we create a new board up here. I'm sorry, and so we're going to be using what happens in the board that is we're listening essentially to what's happening for the board, the back end of the model, for when an add function happens there. So if you look at the board.js, there is an add function in the board.js. So essentially this listener here is listening for that to happen. When it happens, right, when we add a piece to the board, you need to tell the view what to do with that. So when a piece gets added, what do? That is really all you need to happen. You're not actually creating new pieces into the board. You're just representing the pieces as they get added. This is how you represent them. They get added in a couple of different ways, but for the most part, when you crush a piece and new pieces come down in, this is the event handler that's going to update the view of the model of the game. Same thing for moving, removing. These are things that are going to happen. The back end does these for you. You're just listening here for when those things happen, so you can update the view for your user. Score update we're not going to be doing for this one here, so you don't have to worry about that yet. And when we get to the buttons here, the buttons are going to be mostly there to do two things. Those are there to sort of update what the buttons look like based on the model. And so in the example that I showed you, when you have a state, so let's see what we have, what can we do here? D5. When that's entered here, this is actually pulling from the existing. It's just running some logic, but you're going to update the view to kind of show the user what they can do with these things, okay? So that sort of thing is happening in the, you're managing them basically in button events to make the buttons selectable. And then when people press those buttons on the UI, you then need to update the model based on those clicks, right? So when I click this button, that now should trigger the controller to make changes to the model, right? So when I click this right button, that updates the model on the back end, and then that change in the model gets pushed to the view, which is what changes the screen here, okay? And so the all those buttons essentially are to do that, to handle what should the controller change about the model when those buttons are pressed. We won't be using the key features. You don't need to have those, I don't think, for PS2. And then, so that's all the script, right? This is all the actual controller bits that you're going to be handling. And then the view parts, what we actually see, are going to be contained here in the HTML. And again, this should be a relatively simple thing. So you're demonstrating column, the first column here, column 1, is just the new game button and the little Candy Crush logo. Column 2, I recommend making this as a table. And you actually don't even have to make the table here. You can make a function in the JavaScript, in the script area, that creates a table. And then here you just actually call that table and place it into the view, okay? And then column 3, again, is all your buttons. Same thing. You're just kind of creating the spaces, the view of those buttons. What they do is all happening in the script part. One thing I did want to mention here too is for this main column, when you are actually creating this candy board, I want you to have the right frame of mind, because otherwise it leads you down this rabbit hole that really is unfair. You aren't creating new pieces. You are creating visualizations of the pieces for your UI. When you start a game, the back end creates a board and creates essentially a small matrix of each of the candy pieces, right? You don't have to create that. It's already baked into the back end here. You just have to find it and figure out how it works. But what you then need to do for this table is to understand and get the information from the model so that you can properly represent each of the pieces in the view. Okay, so from the model, the piece in A1 here is a green piece. And so I set, using CSS really to make it simple, I just set the view of it, what it looks like, based on what the model says the state of this piece is. So you're not creating new pieces for the board. And that's going to be a huge wormhole to avoid. You're reading from the model what the board state is and then representing it here. So I'm going to take a pause here so we can have a little bit of a break. I'm going to come back and walk you through a little bit of this using a tic-tac-toe board so you can kind of see some more of this model view and controller relationship here. So we'll look at the tic-tac-toe board, some of the controller logic that happens there from the JavaScript, and then the model that's representing all these things. I'll show you some of that back end in the next video, and I will see you then. Thanks.